I was standing near the edge of the ballroom when everything began to unravel. The chandeliers above us glowed a warm gold, the kind of light that makes everything look softer than it really is. Outside, snow pressed against the windows in slow waves, muffling the world. Inside, the orchestra played something gentle and old, and every guest seemed dressed in shades of deep green and silver. It was supposed to be a perfect Christmas celebration. My dad had just been promoted to CEO of a mid-size manufacturing company instead, Northern Michigan. And this dinner was his big night. For anyone listening, tell me what you are doing right now. Are you driving, cooking, resting, knitting, folding laundry? I always love hearing where people are when they let stories like this find them. As for me, that night, I was standing in a room full of 200 people, trying to steady my breath. My name is Amy Henderson. I was 34 that winter. I had driven 3 hours in light snow from the hospital where I worked because I told myself it mattered to show up for my dad. I had even bought a dress I was not sure I liked, a deep navy blue one that felt both too formal and not formal enough. But it was the only thing in my closet that did not look like scrubs or jeans. I wanted the night to go smoothly. I wanted peace. I should have known better. Dad rose from his seat at the head table with the confidence of a man who believed the whole room had been built to admire him. People stopped talking. Glasses still. He tapped the side of his water goblet with a fork, and the soft chime pulled every eye toward him. He smiled, wide and full of self-satisfaction. I knew that smile. I had grown up beneath it. He began thanking everyone for coming. He talked about hard work and long nights, and how proud he was to finally reach a position he believed he had deserved for years. People clapped. He raised his hands to quiet them, enjoying the moment a little too much. Then he shifted his gaze toward me, and I felt my stomach drop. "This right here," he said, loud enough to cut through the music. "This is my lazy, fat daughter." The laughter hit fast, sharp, echoing against the crystal and polished floors. Some people looked uncomfortable, but they laughed anyway, because that is what people do when they want to stay on the right side of power. Others laughed because they thought he was joking. My face heated so fast it felt like I had stepped into an oven. I kept my shoulders still, my breath even. I had learned years ago not to give him any reaction he could use later. David kept going. He loved attention the way some men love bourbon. He talked about how I had always been slow, how I ate too much at Christmas as a kid, how he used to tease me about needing a separate chair at family cookouts. The crowd roared. My palms stung from clenching them too hard. Across the room, I caught sight of a man watching me. Dark, sandy hair, broad shoulders, dressed in a simple black suit that somehow looked more dignified than anything else in the room. His expression was steady, serious, almost protective. He looked familiar, but I could not remember who he was, so I looked away before I understood why that unsettled me. Dad lifted his wine glass again, still grinning, when his phone started to ring. A sudden bright chirp cutting through the laughter. He frowned at the screen. The device was connected to his smartwatch, and the soft light from it lit up his face. He answered with that practiced, jovial tone of his. "Yes, sir. Merry Christmas to you, too." Then something in his posture changed. His smile faltered. His shoulders stiffened, and the room quieted, as if it sensed the shift before any of us did. The voice on the other end must have asked something, because Dad looked around the room, searching. His volume climbed without him realizing. "Amy Henderson, present tonight. Is she here?" Guests began turning their heads. The man in the black suit turned too. Dad swallowed hard. "My daughter, Amy. She is 34, brown blonde hair. I'm a little overweight." "Are you sure that Amy is your VIP guest?" The words tumbled out of his mouth, loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. They hung in the air like smoke, heavy, clinging. The laughter that had filled the room seconds earlier vanished. A cold silence swept through the hall, so complete I could hear the soft click of someone adjusting their bracelet. Nearby, every head turned toward me. 200 sets of eyes, some wide, some are confused, Some are guilty. Dad blinked fast, looking from me to the phone like the device had betrayed him. His face drained of color so quickly it reminded me of snow melting away from hot asphalt. He pulled the wine glass to his lips with a shaking hand, trying to appear composed, but his nerves betrayed him. He choked on the sip. A sharp cough, then another. The wine sprayed forward in a dark arc across the white linen tablecloth. People gasped. Chairs scraped backward. Someone whispered my name. I stood there, frozen in place, my heart hammering so loudly it drowned out the orchestra. I did not understand why the chairman of my dad's company would know my name. I did not understand why he would call me a VIP, but something deep inside me knew this moment was only the beginning of something bigger. Something that had been set in motion long before this night. I watched my dad stare at me with eyes full of panic, and I felt the ground shift beneath us, as if the truth he had buried for years was finally clawing its way to the surface. I did not yet know how or why. I only knew everything was about to change. And that is where the night truly began, even though the real story had started weeks before, in a very different kind of room, and with very different lighting. It was early December at Lakeshore Regional, the hospital where I worked as a trauma surgeon in Western Michigan. The first real snowstorm of the season was blowing sideways against the emergency room window, and the whole building felt like a ship leaning into the wind. I was on call for the night, already tired from a long shift, when the charge nurse hurried toward me with that look I had learned to recognize. The one that meant something bad was coming through the doors. Military transport en route from Camp Huron, she said, breathless, eyes sharp. Male, early 30s, blast injury, low blood pressure. They called ahead. He was circling the drain. My brain switched into that strange calm it always finds when everything else goes wild. All right, I heard myself say. Let us get a room ready. Let us get blood. Let us get the team. We moved as one practiced unit. The nurses checked ventilators and laid out sterile packs. The anesthesiologist was called from the break room. The techs rolled monitors and crash carts into Trauma Bay 1. I washed my hands at the scrub sink, feeling the hot water and the sting of the antiseptic soap on my skin. And for a moment, I let my forehead rest against the cool metal of the dispenser. There is a quiet thought I never say out loud, the one that whispers every time we prepare like this. Please let me be enough for this one. The doors from the ambulance bay burst open with a rush of cold air and the sound of squeaky wheels. Two medics in dark uniforms pushed in a gurney, plastic rattling, bags of fluid swinging. On it lay a man, pale as paper under the harsh fluorescent lights, chest rising fast and shallow. His hair was a light brown, almost blonde where the light caught it, cut close on the sides, the way soldiers wear it. His shirt had been cut away, and his abdomen was wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. Pressure is 80/40, one medic rattled off. Heart rate 140. Shrapnel to the right side. Uncontrolled bleeding. He has had 4 units in transport. We are losing the line. We slid him onto our bed, monitors snapping to his skin, the room filling with the steady beeping that always sounds too loud when someone is that close to gone. I pressed my fingers against his neck and felt a rapid, thready pulse. Stay with me, I said, leaning over him. My name is Dr. Henderson. We are going to take care of you. His eyelids flickered. For a second, hazel eyes met mine, glazed with pain, but still alive. He tried to say something, but it came out as a rough exhale. We do not have time to wait for more scans, I told the anesthesiologist quietly. He is bleeding out. We are going to the operating room right now. There are moments in this job where seconds turn into a currency you can feel, slipping through your fingers. This was one of them. We pushed the bed down the corridor, the wheels thumping over seams in the floor, fluorescent lights strobing above us. Someone shouted for the elevator. Another voice called up to the operating room to say we were coming. In the operating room, everything sharpened. Masks, caps, gloved hands. The smell of antiseptic is stronger, almost metallic. The nurse counted instruments in a steady voice, a ritual that grounded us all. The anesthesiologist adjusted the tubing, his face serious behind his mask. Monitor alarms softened as we got him stabilized enough to cut. Ready, I said, more to myself than anyone else. Let us see what we have. The first incision always feels like stepping off a ledge. Once you do it, you are committed. We opened him up, and the issue was exactly what I had feared. Internal bleeding, multiple sources. Shrapnel had torn through places that do not like to be disturbed. For a second, everything in front of me blurred into red. Then training and years of nights like this took over. Clamp here, suction there, sponge, more light. I heard my own voice, low and steady, giving instructions. The scrub nurse moved like a mind reader, placing instruments into my hand before I even finished asking. Time turned into a strange, elastic thing, stretching and snapping back, marked only by the soft updates from the anesthesiologist. Pressure rising a bit. He is holding. Heart rate slowing. He is still with us. We controlled one bleed, then another, and another. I worked in narrow, careful movements. Every structure in that part of the body lives too close to something vital. One wrong cut, and he would not leave this table. There was a moment when I thought we were losing him. The line on the monitor dipped. The beeping sped up, and his skin took on that gray hue that makes your own heart stutter. I felt sweat trickle down my spine under the gown. "Stay with me," I whispered, not even sure if I said it out loud or only in my head. It felt like hours, but it was closer to 3. At last, the bleeding slowed. The field cleared. We repaired what we could repair, cleaned out what we could not save, and closed in careful layers. When we finally stepped back, his numbers were not perfect, but they were steady. "We will get him to the intensive care unit," I said. "Let him rest. We will see if he wants to stick around." It sounds flippant when I say it like that, but in my heart, I meant every word. Sometimes the body does the work. Sometimes the spirit does. Later, in the hallway outside the operating room, I studied his chart. His name was Ethan Cole, early 30s, Army captain, transferred from Camp Huron after a training incident. Listed as next of kin was someone with the same last name. No other details. There was a small note, flagged with a red mark, that said, "Command will follow up in person." So he was important to someone. They all are, of course, but there was something about the way that note was written that made me pause. The next day, after round, I stopped by the intensive care unit to check on him. The room was dim, monitors humming softly, tubes and wires trailing from his arms and chest. His eyes were closed, his face less pale than the night before. I stood there for a moment, listening to the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator, the steady blip of the heart monitor. You did your part, I thought. The rest is up to him now. A nurse stepped in, glanced at me, then at the chart. You pulled him back from the edge, she said quietly. Command already called twice. They want to know when they can speak to the surgeon. Tell them he is stable for now, I answered. And tell them I prefer staying out of photographs. She grinned. You and your anonymous hero thing, Dr. Henderson. I shrugged. But inside I felt an odd mix of pride and discomfort. I did not become a surgeon for plaques or newspaper stories. I became one because I understood what it felt like to be helpless. And I never wanted to feel that way again. 2 days later, Ethan came off the ventilator. I was on afternoon rounds when I saw his eyes open fully for the first time, clear and focused. There were dark circles under them, but there was life there, strong and stubborn. How are you feeling? I asked, stepping closer to his bed. Like I got hit by a truck and then the truck backed up, he rasped. His voice was rough, but there was a small hint of humor in it. That means we did our job, I said. You are going to be all right, Captain Cole, but it is going to be a long road. He studied me for a moment, as if trying to connect my masked face from the operating room with the person standing in front of him now. His gaze settled on my eyes, and I could feel the weight of it. You are the surgeon, he said slowly. Yes, I am. He swallowed, throat working against the dryness. Thank you. Those 2 words came out soft, but they hit me harder than most applause I had ever heard. I nodded, feeling a tightness in my own chest. Rest. Focus on breathing and healing. That is your job now. He gave a small, tired smile. I will remember your face, he murmured, lids already drooping again. I am not done saying thank you. I left the room before he could see how much that shook me. Later that week, a representative from the base called, asking if we could arrange a small photo for their internal newsletter. Something about honoring the medical team. I told them no. They could have a group shot of the unit if they wanted, but not my name alone. The public part never sat right with me. In the quiet of the locker room that night, as I changed back into my jeans and sweater, I thought about Ethan's eyes when he said he would remember my face. I brushed it off as just another expression of gratitude, but a small voice inside me wondered if our paths were meant to cross again. I had no idea then how tightly his story would twist into mine, or how that one night in the operating room would follow me all the way to a glittering ballroom on Christmas and the moment my dad's world cracked open in front of everyone. I did not sleep much after that night in the intensive care unit. Even when I closed my eyes, I could still see Ethan's face the moment he realized he was alive. There was something steady in the way he had looked at me. Grateful. Clear, like he had anchored himself to the sound of my voice. I shook it off more than once, telling myself I was tired and imagining things, but the memory stayed with me. Whenever I stepped into the hallway near his room, I felt some small pull inside my chest that I could not quite explain. A few days later, after one of my morning rounds, I was called to the administrative office by the head of our department. I assumed it was paperwork or the usual rundown of trauma cases, but the moment I stepped in, the air felt different. 2 hospital coordinators stood beside the desk, one of them holding a short list printed on gold letterhead. On the top corner was the name of my dad's company, Great Lakes Industries. The coordinator told me that someone from their executive office had called earlier. The woman did not know detail, only that a representative of the chairman himself had made a request. They wanted a name added to an upcoming guest list, a VIP list to be exact. The coordinator held the sheet out to me, and my eyes landed on something that made me blink. My name. Amy Henderson, 34, marked as a special guest. I asked why in the world they would want me on a holiday event list at a company I had no role in. The coordinator said the caller had been very firm but polite. The instructions were simple. Add her name. Do not question it. Make sure she receives the private invitation. When someone had asked for my title so they could write it correctly, the chairman's office simply said to use whatever title I normally list in any professional setting. That part made me laugh under my breath. I had never liked drawing attention to myself, so on most non-medical paperwork, I wrote something vague, like consultant or medical staff, terms people barely register. No one at my dad's company would have connected the dots. That was exactly how I preferred it. I walked out of the office with the list still echoing in my head. It did not occur to me that the chairman of my dad's company might know exactly who I was. It did not occur to me that he had been searching for me quietly ever since. His son arrived at our hospital. I had assumed Ethan's chart would be reviewed by his base and his family, but I never imagined that the man running one of the largest employers in the region would take notice of me. It was a Thursday afternoon when the truth began to settle in. I had just finished checking post-operative notes when the hospital operator informed me that a call had come from the main office of Great Lakes Industries. The caller only asked one question. Was Dr. Henderson available for a message? The operator had told them I was with a patient. They left no other details. Something in my chest tightened. I tried to brush it off. It had been a long week. Maybe I was reading too much into things. The next day, while I was reviewing imaging scans in the radiology wing, another call arrived. This time it was shorter. The chairman's assistant wanted to confirm that I had received the VIP notice for the Christmas event. The assistant stated that the chairman sends his personal appreciation. That was all. No other information. No explanation for why a man like him would take the time to acknowledge someone he had never met. I stood in the hallway for a long moment after that call, the phone still warm against my ear. A strange mix of confusion and unease washed over me. I had worked at Lakeshore Regional for years. I had seen families express thanks in all kinds of ways. Cards, flowers, a handshake in the lobby. But a private VIP invitation to a corporate celebration was something entirely different. It was not until a week later that everything clicked. I had just finished my shift and was gathering my things when a message arrived from a restricted military email. It was short and formal, the kind that uses careful language without giving away too much. It informed me that Captain Ethan Cole had been transferred to a rehabilitation unit closer to his base. At the end of the message was a single line that made me sit down on the bench outside the locker room. The chairman has been informed that the doctor who saved his son's life will be in attendance at the company Christmas celebration. I read that sentence 3 times. My pulse felt suddenly louder, thudding in my throat. It was the first time anyone had told me outright that the man Ethan had listed as next of kin was not just family, but the very chairman of the company my dad had worked at for more than 20 years. I felt lightheaded, as if the floor had tilted. The email continued. Captain Cole has been notified as well. He expressed intent to attend the event. The words intent to attend made something bloom and twist inside my chest at the same time. Ethan had been grateful in the hospital, yes, but this was something more. A purpose, a deliberate decision. He wanted to see me again, not in a hospital gown or under operating lights. As a person, as the woman who had stood above him in that dark moment between life and death. I sat there, elbows propped on my knees, my hands covering my mouth. The hum of the hospital around me faded into a distant blur. In the quiet of that locker room, with the tile floor cold under my feet and the faint smell of antiseptic still clinging to my clothes, I finally understood why my name had been placed on a list I had never asked to join. The chairman wanted to thank me in person. Maybe privately. Maybe publicly. I did not know. And he wanted Ethan to have the chance to meet me again in a world outside. Trauma and fear. A gentle knock on the open doorway pulled me back to the present. A nurse poked her head in and asked if I needed help with anything. I shook my head, but my voice did not come right away. My mind was still turning, piecing every little detail together, realizing how far the ripples of that night in the operating room had spread. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with the heater blowing warm air against my hands. The sky was turning a smoky shade of blue, the kind that comes right before winter darkness settles in. I stared out at the drifting snowflakes catching in the beam of the street lamp and felt a pressure in my chest, something like anticipation tangled with dread. I had not told my dad anything about the surgery, or about Ethan, or about the chairman's attempts to reach me. I had no intention of telling him. After years of being dismissed, mocked, and dismissed again, sharing my accomplishments with him felt less like speaking and more like throwing words into a well. But now my name was printed on a list that my dad would see. A VIP list. For a man who barely acknowledged me on his good days, this was going to raise questions I was not prepared to answer. I let the engine idle, my fingers wrapped loosely around the steering wheel. I told myself that it would be fine, that he would not even notice, that I could move through the Christmas event quietly, slip in and out, maybe catch a moment to greet the chairman, maybe shake Ethan's hand, maybe thank them for the invitation and nothing more. At that point, I still believed the night would pass without anyone paying much attention to me. I did not yet understand how wrong I was. I sat in the car telling myself it would be fine, that Dad would barely notice my name tucked somewhere on a list he probably would not even bother reading. But the longer I stared through the windshield, watching snow drift across the parking lot lights, the more an old, familiar heaviness crept in. It sat behind my ribs, the way childhood memories sometimes do, uninvited and sharp around the edges. The truth was, nights like the one coming did not make me nervous because of the crowd or the formality, or even the chairman himself. They scared me because every time I stood anywhere near my dad, years of old cuts found their way back to the surface. It had always been that way, and no amount of adulthood or degrees or titles had ever really muted it. I remember being 8, maybe 9, standing outside Pine Hill Church in my best dress. Mom had fixed my hair in a way she thought looked festive, a little barrette shaped like a star clipped behind my ear. I had been proud of it until my dad pinched my arm right there on the church steps. I can still feel the press of his fingers even now. He leaned down and muttered that I should not reach for a second donut at the fellowship table, because people would talk. The men nearby laughed like it was clever, and the women turned their faces away like it was weather. I told myself they did not hear, but of course they had. Everyone had. Mom stepped between us then, straightening my collar as if smoothing fabric could hide what had happened. She told me to run along and save her seat inside. I did what she said, even though my throat felt too tight to swallow. When I slid into the pew, the stained glass washed everything in blue. And I remember thinking that maybe God could not see me clearly in that light. Maybe that was a good thing. A few years later, Dad did something similar at the family picnic behind my uncle's farmhouse. I had just reached the cooler to grab a lemonade when he lifted my wrist in front of anything with sugar in it if I wanted to fit into my clothes by Thanksgiving. The boys snickered. One of my older cousins elbowed another like it was sport. I kept my face still, but my chest burned all the way through the three-legged race that followed. That night I cried in the bathtub with the faucet running, hoping the noise would hide the sound from Mom. She found me anyway. She sat on the tile floor, her back against the vanity, and talked to me about kindness and smallness and how some people confuse one for the other. She said I was good and strong and brighter than I knew. But she also said, with that tired look in her eyes, that my dad had grown up in a house where teasing was the only language he learned. She said I had to choose what I believed about myself. I nodded like I understood, even though I was too young to know what choosing meant. When I was 13, Dad started comparing me to my brother more openly. My brother, who was 2 years older and slim and loud and athletic, could do no wrong. Dad bragged about his baseball trophies, his grades, his charm. At dinner, he would point at the mashed potatoes on my plate and tell me to go. Easy. Unless I wanted to look like the Thanksgiving turkey by the time fall rolled around. Mom would reach for the serving spoon and distract him by asking about work, but the embarrassment had already sunk into my skin. I became careful about how I held my fork, how I stood up from the table, how I sat down. I learned to breathe softly, move softly, be soft. The worst one happened the summer I turned 15, during a church league softball game. I had hit a double, which was rare enough that even I was surprised. As I reached second base, I heard Dad yell from the bleachers something about how the only reason I got that far was because the outfielders were afraid to get in my way. A few people laughed. I remember staring at the dust on my cleats and wishing I could disappear into it. That night, I told Mom I did not want to play anymore. She said she understood. She held me while I cried into her sweatshirt, the one that smelled like lavender and ground coffee. She said that one day I would grow into a life where I did not have to shrink, to make other people comfortable. But Dad never changed. If anything, he got worse when I reached adulthood. Every accomplishment I earned seemed to irritate him instead of impressing him. When I graduated college, he asked if the gown made me look any slimmer. When I got accepted into medical school, he said something about how I would be too soft-hearted to handle real emergencies. He told me I would fall apart the first time someone bled on me. He laughed when he said it. He always laughed. Mom passed away during my residency. After the funeral, Dad shook hands in the church lobby like he was entertaining clients, while I stood by the guest book trying not to collapse. When a neighbor asked him what I did, he told her I pushed papers around in a hospital and tried not to faint. I was standing right beside him and he did not even hesitate. That was the night I realized silence was sometimes the only armor I had. Explaining myself never changed anything. Arguing made it worse. So I started keeping my life small around him. I told him half-truths about work, choosing words that sounded forgettable. I never mentioned difficult procedures or awards or the long nights in trauma. I hid my achievements the way some people hide bruises, not because I was ashamed of them, but because I did not want to hand him ammunition. When I finished my surgical fellowship, he asked if I had finally settled into a job or if I was still bouncing around. Bouncing around. As if years of studying and sacrifice were nothing more than a casual hobby. I said I worked with a medical team downtown. That was all. He did not ask for more. Even after all this time, a part of me still hoped he might notice something good in me, something worth acknowledging. But that hope became quieter as the years passed, like an old radio turning staticky. I learned to put distance between us. Not physically, but emotionally. A kind of invisible boundary that kept me steady. Maybe that is why I never told him about the night I operated on Ethan. It was too important, too delicate, too full of meaning to hand over to someone who might turn it into a joke. I could not bear the idea of him dismissing the moment that had changed Ethan's life and mine. so I kept it to myself. Taking alone in that parking lot now, the heater humming softly, I felt that old instinct tightening inside me again. Not fear exactly, more like bracing, preparing, knowing that Dad had a way of turning any situation into something that scraped against the bone. And a thought flickered through me with such clarity that I almost said it aloud. This is why you hide your work. This is why you keep your life separate. This is why you learned to be quiet. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield as I whispered to myself that I could handle the Christmas event, that I had handled far worse. But even as the words left my mouth, a doubt curled in the back of my mind. Because if Dad had any idea who I had become, what I had done, or how far I had come without him, he would not celebrate it. He would use it as another reason to remind me of everything he believed I lacked. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, feeling that old, familiar ache settle in, the kind that came from years of trying to be small enough to stay out of his line of fire. I knew then that the night ahead held more weight than I wanted to admit. I knew that walking into that ballroom would stir things I thought I had outgrown. But I also knew I was not the same girl who had cried in the bathtub or stared at her dusty cleats or hid behind her mother on church steps. Still, the past has a way of waiting for you, even when you think you outran it. I sat there a moment longer, letting the heater warm my hands, before finally turning the key and pulling away. I was wrong. That is what kept circling through my mind as I stood in that ballroom, the smell of spilled wine and roasted beef and floral centerpieces all mixing into something that made my stomach turn. For a heartbeat after Dad choked on his drink, there was absolute silence. Then the sound started to creep back in. A chair scraping, a spoon clinking against glass, a nervous little laugh from somewhere near the bar that died as soon as it began. The orchestra had stopped playing without my noticing, and the sudden absence of music made every whisper sound louder. 200 people were looking at me, some with open curiosity, some with a kind of thinly veiled pity, others with that peculiar mix of smugness and surprise that you only see when someone they have underestimated turns out to be important to someone more powerful. My face felt hot, but my hands had gone cold. I had the strange sensation that my body was standing in one place while the rest of the room floated a few inches away. At our table, Aunt Ruth gave a tiny, scandalized gasp and pressed a napkin to her chest like she was in a stage play. She leaned toward my brother and hissed something about how embarrassing this was, as if I had done anything except exist in the wrong chair at the wrong time. My brother kept his eyes on his plate. He always did know how to disappear without leaving the room. Dad was still dabbing frantically at the dark splash of wine on the white tablecloth, as if erasing the stain could erase the words that had just left his mouth. His face was a strange mixture of red and pale, like all the blood in his body had suddenly forgotten where it was supposed to go. He would not look at me. He kept his eyes on his hands, on the phone, on anything else. The people from his company, the ones who had been laughing the loudest a minute earlier, were suddenly very interested in their silverware. A few glanced from Dad to me, then toward the far end of the room, where the event coordinator stood with her clipboard pressed tightly against her chest. She looked like she wanted to crawl under one of the tables and stay there. Until New Year, I felt the urge to move, to do something, even if it was just to step away from the blast radius of my dad's humiliation. My knees did not trust me, though, so I stayed where I was, fingers curled around the back of my chair. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. That was when I became aware of the man in the dark suit again. He had been standing near one of the tall cocktail tables earlier, a little apart from the crowd, watching everything with the attentive stillness of someone used to reading. Danger in small shifts of body language. Now he was closer, maybe only 4 or 5 steps away, his eyes fixed on me rather than on the spectacle of my dad choking on his own. Arrogance. His gaze was not sharp or invasive. It was measuring, yes, but there was concern there too. And something like recognition. It took me a second to place him, to match the cleaned-up version in front of me with the memory of a bloodied face under harsh operating room lights. Ethan. I felt my breath catch. Of all the strange turns this night was taking, seeing him here, in this place, after everything, felt like the universe was stacking coincidences on top of each other just to see how much I could hold. He took a step in my direction, then another. Before he could take a third, Aunt Ruth rose slightly from her seat and reached out a hand to stop him, fingers catching his sleeve. "That is family business," she murmured, voice low but carrying. Best not to get involved. Her tone was polite on the surface, but I heard the warning underneath. Outsiders should not step into the middle of a Henderson mess. We were adept at making those on our own. Ethan looked down at her hand, then back up at her face. His expression did not change much, but something in the way he squared his shoulders shifted. He spoke quietly enough that only those of us nearby could hear, but there was steel in his words. "Ma'am," he said, still civil, still calm, "I think I am already involved." He gently removed his sleeve from her grip, not yanking, just peeling her fingers away with the kind of steady respect that comes from years of following protocols and standing his ground anyway. Aunt Ruth looked offended, but she did not try to stop him again. For a second, the whole scene felt surreal. My aunts and uncles frozen around their plates, the Christmas tree lights blinking in the corner, the buzz of dimmed conversations swirling like smoke, and through it all, this one man, cutting a straight line toward me, as if the rest of them had ceased to exist. I watched him approach, every step making my heart beat just a little bit harder. I did not know what he planned to say. I did not know if he would reveal our connection in front of everyone, or if he just wanted to make sure I had not completely crumbled. He stopped a respectful distance away, close enough that I could see the faint scar near his hairline that had not been there the night I operated on him. He was thinner than he had been in the hospital, too, the way people sometimes are after a long stay. But his eyes were the same, steady, clear, warm in a way that felt unfamiliar in this room. "Dr. Henderson," he said softly. Hearing that name, in that place, in front of people who had spent my entire life pretending I was nothing special, hit me like a physical shove. I felt the breath leave my lungs. I swallowed and forced myself to meet his eyes. "Ethan," I managed. He nodded once, not making a production of it, not looking around to see who was watching. His focus stayed on me, as if we were the only two people in that glittering, suffocating space. "Are you okay?" he asked. Such a small question. 4 simple words. But no one else had asked me that all night. Not my brother, who had turned his face down. Not Aunt Ruth, who was too busy worrying about the spectacle. Certainly not my dad, who was still wrestling with his own panic. It was like Ethan had reached through all the noise and laid a hand on the one part of me that still felt sane. I almost lied, almost pasted on a brittle smile and said I was fine, because that is what I had been trained to do since I was old enough to. Understand that my feelings made other people uncomfortable. But standing there, under the chandelier light, with my dad frantically trying to scrub his mistake out of a tablecloth, and my relatives looking anywhere but at me, something inside me refused to follow the old script. "I am not sure," I said quietly. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thinner than usual. "But I am standing." A tiny smile flickered across his face. Not amused exactly, more like relieved. "That counts for something," he said. Behind him, I could feel the weight of the room still pressing in. People were pretending to go back to their conversations, but their attention kept sliding toward us every few seconds. Curious, assessing, gossip already forming in their eyes. I knew how this worked. By morning, there would be a dozen versions of this story floating around town, most of them missing the truth entirely. Ethan seemed to sense it too. He shifted slightly, angle his body so that he stood between me and the worst of the stairs. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it formed a kind of shield. For the first time that night, I did not feel completely exposed. I heard my brother clear his throat behind me, like he wanted to say something, then think better of it. Aunt Ruth muttered under her breath about manners and drama. I ignored them both. "You did not have to come over," I said to Ethan, forcing my hands to relax their grip on the chair. "Maybe not," he answered. But I remembered how it felt to have someone stand over me when I was helpless. I figured the least I could do was return the favor. My throat tightened. I thought about the operating room, The rushing beeps, the smell of blood and antiseptic, the way his life had hung on the edge of a decision that had fallen to my hands. Back then, he had trusted me without knowing anything about me besides my name and my voice. Now here he was, repaying that trust in a completely different battlefield. "Thank you," I said. The words came out barely louder than a whisper, but he heard them. He nodded again, like we had just confirmed something important. Then he glanced over his shoulder in the direction of the head table, where Dad sat stiff and stiff-jawed, phone still in his hand. The look on Ethan's face changed. Not into anger exactly, but into something colder, sharper. The gaze of a man who had seen enough of the world to recognize cowardice when it presented itself in a suit and tie. "There is more to this," he said quietly, returning his attention to me. "The way the chairman said your name on that call. The way your dad reacted. You do not have to tell me anything, but just know that I am not blind." I let out a slow breath I did not realize I had been holding. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like someone was watching my dad and seeing what I saw, instead of the charming version he performed for everyone else. The chaos of the room kept pulsing around us, a living thing. Somewhere near the bar, glasses clinked. The event coordinator had started speaking with one of the junior managers, both of them glancing nervously toward the head table, as if waiting for instruction. The band members still held their instruments, uncertain whether they should start playing again or wait for some kind of signal. All I could really focus on, though, was the simple fact that in this entire crowded ballroom, full of people who shared my last name, and people who relied on my dad for their paycheck, the only person who had walked toward me instead of away was a man who owed me nothing more than a thank you. And he had already given me that. For a moment, the noise around us dimmed. The clatter of plates softened. The cold, watchful eyes of my relatives faded into the background. There was just the soft hum of the lights, the faint scent of pine from the massive Christmas tree, and the steady presence of this soldier standing in front of me as if he had decided that whatever happened next, I was not going to stand alone. It was a small thing, measured against the years of hurt that had come before, but sometimes small things are what crack the surface. I straightened my shoulders, just a little, and lifted my chin, and in the same instant, the room seemed to hiccup again. A young man in a white shirt and black vest slipped out from behind the head, a table, clutching a phone in both hands like it was something fragile. His eyes were wide, a little panicked, the way staff looks when they get dragged into something far above their pay grade. He went straight for my dad. "Sir," he said, voice pitched low but urgent, "the chairman is asking to speak with you again. He says it is important." Dad had just managed to smear the worst of the wine into a pale pink stain on the tablecloth. He looked up, irritation flickering across his face before he seemed to remember who might be on the other end of that line. His jaw tightened. He snatched the phone out of the young man's hands and waved him away. I could see his fingers trembling around the device, even from where I stood. He pressed it to his ear, forcing his features back into something like a smile, though it looked more like a grimace. "Yes, sir," he said, a little too loudly. "Yes, it is Robert Henderson. Merry Christmas again." There was a brief pause. A hush settled over the immediate circle around us. No one was supposed to hear what the chairman said, but curiosity has good ears. People leaned in, without moving their feet. I could not make out the other voice, just the faint hum of it. Whatever was being said made my dad sit up even straighter. The color that had started to return to his cheeks vanished again. No, sir," he blurted. "That must be some sort of misunderstanding." His volume had crept up another notch. A few nearby guests exchanged looks. Ethan shifted subtly closer to me, his presence a solid weight at my side. I could practically feel the tension rolling off him. Dad listened for another second, then laughed. "Too high, too thin, Dr. Amy Henderson," he repeated, and hearing my full name in that tone made my stomach clench. "That is just my daughter, sir. She is here, of course, but she is not, well, she is not anyone important." The words landed like little stones inside my chest. I had heard variations of that sentence my whole life. It still amazed me that he could say it without a flicker of hesitation. The phone crackled faintly. The chairman must have said something sharp because my dad flinched. His voice jumped again. "No, sir," he said, much too loud now. "She is not any kind of VIP. She is 34, brown blonde hair, overweight. She works some kind of medical job, but I did not think that mattered for tonight." A wave of cold washed over me. Around us, the half-circle of listeners stiffened. Someone sucked in a breath. Someone else muttered my name under their breath like they were tasting it for the first time. Ethan's hand twitched at his side. For a moment, I thought he might step forward and simply take the phone. Chain of command be damned. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle jumped near his temple. His eyes never left my dad's face. The chairman's voice rose enough that even from where I stood, I could hear the faint outline of his words. Not every syllable, but enough to stitch them together. Dr. Henderson. Saved my son. Important. Respect. Dad froze. His fingers tightened so hard around the stem of his wineglass that I wondered if it might snap. He stared straight ahead, the veneer of charm stripped away, leaving something small and frightened in its place. "Sir, there must be a mix-up," he said. But the confidence was gone. "She has never said anything about saving anyone. She does not talk about her work." I assumed he trailed off. He assumed what he had always assumed, that nothing I did when I walked out of his line of sight mattered enough to carry weight in a room like this. The silence on the other end of the line stretched, heavy as lead. Even the people who could not hear the chairman's voice could feel its pressure through my dad's reaction. The young waiter hovered near the edge of the scene, looking like he wanted to sink into the floor. Ethan leaned closer to me, though he still did not touch me. His voice was low, meant only for my ears. "If he keeps talking like that," Ethan murmured, "I am going to have to say something." There was no bravado in it, no puffed-up righteousness. It sounded like a simple statement of fact, the way a soldier might state an objective. Get from point A to point B. Do not leave your people behind. My heart pounded so hard that I could feel it in my throat. A part of me wanted him to stay quiet, to let the moment pass, so I could go back to being invisible. Another part, the part that had stitched a man back together in an operating room, the part that had grown tired of swallowing insults just to keep the peace, wanted someone to finally call my dad what he was. Dad cleared his throat. His eyes darted around, finally landing on me. For the first time that night, he really looked, as if trying to reconcile the daughter he dragged to family dinners with the person the chairman kept insisting was a doctor who had done something worthy of gratitude. "She is just my kid," he said into the phone, desperation leaking into every word. "Sir, I promise you, if she did anything, it was purely her job. You did not need to list her as a VIP. I am sure we can fix whatever this is." Ethan inhaled sharply. I could sense the decision forming in him like a storm cloud thickening. If my dad denied my work one more time, I knew Ethan was going to walk right up to that table and say, in front of God and everybody, exactly who I was and what I had done. I almost wanted him to do it. The chairman's voice rose again, more distinct now. I heard my name, heard the words surgeon and saved, and the phrase, not treated properly tonight. Each piece felt like a spotlight being aimed at a corner my dad had carefully, kept in shadow. Dad's face went slack. His mouth opened, then closed. He swallowed hard enough that I could see his throat work. With the phone still pressed to his ear, he grabbed for his wineglass again with his free hand, as if the familiar motion might steady him. Instead, his fingers slipped against the slick stem. The glass tipped. A streak of dark red splashed across his shirt front, blooming outward like a wound. A few drops hit the table again, deepening the earlier stain. Around us, guests tried to pretend they were not watching, but their gazes were glued to the scene. You could feel the collective embarrassment, the realization that the man they had been laughing with minutes earlier was unspooling in front of them. Dad fumbled the glass upright, his hand shaking so badly that it rattled against the table. He muttered something into the phone, a tangle of apologies and excuses that no one could quite catch. His usual booming confidence had shrunk into something humiliated and small. I stood there, watching him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as the giant figure who filled every room of my childhood, but as a frightened man who had finally run headfirst into a truth he could not twist into a joke. Ethan straightened beside me, shoulders squared, eyes hard. He looked from my dad to me and back again, like a man measuring the distance between what was said and what was real. At that moment, it was clear that whatever came next, the balance in our family had already shifted. My dad just did not know it yet. The chairman must have finished whatever he had to say, because my dad finally lowered the phone. His hand sagged to his side, the screen still glowing in his palm. He looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him, and for one brief second, there was almost something like fear in his eyes. Then he seemed to remember he had an audience. He cleared his throat and forced a laugh that did not sound even a little bit real. "Camokes," he said, voice cracking on the first word before he pushed it louder. "Sorry about the excitement over here. Just a mix-up with the boss. You know how these high-level people get about titles and all that." His gaze flicked toward me, then away so fast it was almost like a flinch. He tried to paste his charming mask back on and tried to reclaim the control he had lost. It would have been almost funny if it had not been built on my humiliation. A murmur moved through the room, low and electric. People were not sure what to do with their eyes or their hands. A few picked up glasses that were already empty, just to have something to hold. The band members shifted on the small stage, whispering to each other, waiting for a cue that was not coming. Ethan took a step forward. He let go of the back of my chair and moved toward the center of the open space between the tables and the dance floor. He did not rush. He did not stomp or shout. He walked with the steady, deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do, and did not plan to apologize for it. I watched him, my heart climbing into my throat. Every conversation in the room seemed to thin and then break off as people noticed him moving. Heads turned. Forks stilled halfway to plates. My Aunt Ruth made a small choking sound and reached for my brother's arm, but he did not move. Ethan turned to face the head table where my dad sat. For a moment, the two of them just looked at each other. One man in an expensive suit, red wine blooming on his shirt front like a badge of poor judgment. The other in a plain dark jacket, shoulders squared, eyes clear, the faint shadow of a scar at his temple catching the light. When Ethan spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried. The room had gone so quiet that every word landed with perfect clarity. "That was not a mix-up," he said. "That was disrespectful." A little ripple ran through the crowd. My dad blinked. "Young man," he began, trying to summon his old authority. "I do not know who you think you are, but this is a private family matter." Ethan shook his head once. "No, sir," he answered. "This is not just family. You are talking about the doctor who saved my life." It was as if someone had shot a flare into a dark sky. The words lit everything. He turned slightly so that more of the room could see his face, but his eyes flicked back to mine, anchoring us to each other. "She saved my life," he said, each syllable measured and sure. "Dr. Amy Henderson. Right there. She is the reason I am standing here instead of my mom picking out a headstone. This winter." You could feel the shift as his words moved through the crowd. People who had heard whispers about a surgeon, about a VIP, suddenly connected the dots. The woman they had watched be called lazy and fat and unimportant was now being identified as someone who had pulled a man back from the brink. You could see comprehension crash over them, some faces flushing with shame, others with a kind of startled respect. The whispers came next. Soft, sharp, everywhere. Doctor, surgeon. Saved him. That one. Her. A woman from my dad's accounting department put a hand to her mouth. One of the senior managers looked at me like I had grown an extra head. Even the event coordinator, who had been clutching her clipboard like a shield, stepped a little closer, as if she suddenly realized the story unfolding would be repeated long after she put that clipboard away. My dad tried to laugh again, but it came out strangled. "Oh, come on," he said. "We are just having a little fun. She is my daughter. We always joke like this." "She knows that." "Right, Amy." Every eye swung to me. I felt the weight of their gaze, heavy as sandbags. The old impulse to nod and smile and make it easier for everybody clawed at me. The good daughter, the quiet one, the one who absorbs the blow so the room can keep pretending nothing is wrong. But Ethan was standing there, his words still hanging in the air, cutting through years of noise, and something inside me that had been bent for a very long time decided it would not fold again. My voice came out low, steady, the way it does when I call for a scalpel in the operating room. "I am not a joke, Dad," I said. "I have never been a joke." You could have heard a pin drop. The murmurs shut down as fast as they had started. My dad stared at me like he had never seen me before. His mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. For once, he did not have a quick comeback. No easy jab. No deflecting one-liner. A woman near the back of the room, someone I recognized vaguely from Human Resources, cleared her throat. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice trembling a little as she directed the words toward me. "I did not know. We did not know." I nodded stiffly, not trusting myself to answer without either crying or snapping. Neither felt like an option. I wanted to play out in front of all these people. Another man, someone from logistics who had been laughing the loudest earlier, set his glass down and stared at the floor. He looked like he wanted to crawl into it. David pushed his chair back as if he meant to stand, then seemed to think better of it. He grabbed his napkin instead, blotting uselessly at the stain on his shirt. "Everybody is too sensitive these days," he muttered. "Cannot even tell a simple joke without people acting like you committed a crime." Ethan looked at him, and there was not an ounce of fear or deference in that gaze. "A joke is only funny if everyone is laughing," he said quietly. I did not hear her laugh. The line sliced through whatever flimsy excuse my dad had been trying to build. He shut his mouth, but the damage was already done. Something inside me gave way then. Not in a collapsing way, more like a release valve finally turning. I felt a wave of exhaustion sweep through me, following by a clarity I had not expected to feel in this room. "I am done," I heard myself say. Not loud, just firm. I stepped away from my chair. The movement startled a few people nearby. As if they had forgotten I had legs and could use them, I could feel their eyes tracking me. But for once, it did not root me to the spot. I turned and walked toward the side doors that led out to the hallway and the restrooms, the soft thud of my heels on the polished floor echoing in my own ears. Behind me, I heard my Aunt Ruth hiss my name, like I was the one making a scene. My brother called out quietly, but he did not follow. He never did. I did not look back. The hallway outside the ballroom was cooler, the air less heavy. The music dimmed to a low thrum. The wall sconces cast a softer light on the patterned carpet. A Christmas wreath hung above a small console table, its red bow drooping slightly, as if it too was tired of holding everything together. I stopped near the end of the corridor, close to a tall window where I could see the snow still falling outside. I put a hand against the cold glass, needing something solid to ground me. My chest felt tight, my throat burned. But the tears I expected did not come. It was like I had crossed some internal line and left them behind with my chair. A moment later, I heard footsteps, firm but not hurried. I did not have to turn to know it was Ethan. The way he moved was already familiar. "I am sorry," he said when he reached me. I let out a short, humorless breath. "For what?" I asked. "Telling the truth." "For waiting as long as I did," he answered. "For not stepping in sooner. I heard him call you those things, and I kept hoping he would stop on his own. That was my mistake." I turned then, leaning back against the window so I could see his face. The hallway light caught the planes of it, the faint lines of pain that still lingered from his recovery, the unwavering honesty in his eyes. "You did more than anyone else in that room," I said softly. "That means something." He studied me for a second, as if checking to see whether I really believed that, or was just saying it to make him feel better. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him, because some of the tension in his shoulders eased. "When my unit got hit," he said slowly, "I remember thinking I was not ready to go. Not yet. I held on to the voice of the person telling me to stay. That was you. So watching your own dad try to make you small in front of all those people, it did something to me. I could not keep my mouth shut and live with myself. The sincerity in his words sliced through a layer of numbness I had not even realized was building up. I swallowed hard, feeling the sting behind my eyes finally threaten to spill over. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, like it had been opened and closed too many times. "I wrote this back when I was still in rehab," he said. "A letter I never got the chance to give you. I figured tonight might be my shot, but things went sideways before I could." He paused, then added, "If you want it, it is yours. If you do not, I will throw it away. Your call." I stared at the paper in his hand. Behind him, through the slightly open ballroom doors, I could hear the murmur of voices struggling to pretend that nothing monumental had just happened. I thought about my dad sitting there, trying to scrape his ego back together. I thought about my mom, about the little girl I had been, about every time I had swallowed my own hurt to make someone else comfortable. I reached out and took the letter. "Thank you," I said. He gave a small nod. For the second time that night, he positioned himself between me and the noise, not blocking my view, just taking some of the weight. In that quiet slice of hallway, with snow drifting past the windows and the muffled sounds of the party, struggling to start up again, I realized that for the first time in my life, someone had seen my dad exactly as he was and chosen to stand with me instead of with him. I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that nothing between my dad and me could ever go back to what it had been. After a while, I slipped my hand into my clutch, tucked Ethan's folded letter safely inside, and told him I needed to go. Not back into the ballroom. Home. Away from the smell of wine and the sound of people trying to pretend. Everything was normal. He offered to walk me to my car. I let him. We did not say much. The quiet between us felt solid, not awkward, like a blanket laid gently over something raw. At the entrance, he stopped, thanked me again in that simple way of his, and said he would be around if I needed anything. I nodded, not trusting myself to open the letter yet. The parking lot was slick with half-melted snow, the cold air biting my cheeks as I walked to my old sedan. The drive home was a blur of headlights and dark country roads. I kept replaying the night in my mind. Dad's words. His face when the chairman corrected him. Ethan standing in the center of that room. My own voice saying, "I am not a joke." It all felt a little unreal, like a movie I had accidentally wandered into. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. A simple one-story with a sagging porch rail and a light still glowing in the front window. I stepped inside and was greeted by the faint smell of pine from the modest tree I had put up in the corner of the living room. I kicked off my shoes, hung up my coat, and stood for a long moment in the silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Then it buzzed again. And again. I picked it up and saw a string of messages from numbers I recognized from years of holiday potlucks and company picnics. People from Great Lakes Industries. People who knew me as Rob's kid, as the quiet daughter who occasionally showed up and always helped with cleanup. One message said the chairman was very disappointed in how things had gone that night. Another hinted that the story was already spreading through the corporate office. Someone else wrote that people were saying the promotion might be reconsidered, at least temporarily, until questions about my dad's behavior were addressed. A picture was attached to one text, a blurry shot of the head table taken from across the room. You could see my dad leaning over the phone, wine on his shirt, his face caught in a moment between anger and panic. My own shoulder was visible at the edge of the frame, half turned away. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. For years, I had imagined my dad facing some kind of consequence for the way he treated me. But in my mind, it had always been something private, an argument that finally went too far. A family member stepping in. I had not pictured it happening in a ballroom filled with coworkers and neighbors. I had not pictured the chairman of his company being the one to hold up a mirror. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was my cousin from my dad's side. Her message was not gentle. She said I had really made Dad look bad. She said I should have laughed along, lightened the mood, not taken things so seriously. She asked what I had been thinking, letting some soldier speak up like that and make a scene. Another message came from my older brother. His words were shorter but sharper. He said that whatever issues I had with Dad should have stayed between us, that now I had jeopardized his promotion, that I needed to fix it somehow. I read their words twice, a strange calm settling over me. The old version of me might have felt a rush of guilt, even though I had not done anything wrong. I might have started drafting apologetic responses, trying to smooth things over, trying to carry the weight of everyone's discomfort on my back. This time I felt something different. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I could feel my heart beating, but my mind was clear in a way that felt new. I typed slowly that Dad had done that to himself, that I had not asked him to use me as the punchline of his big promotion night, that I had not asked the chairman to know my name or to call the party or to correct him. I wrote that if people were disappointed, they should be disappointed in the man who had mocked his own daughter in front of 200 people, not in the one who had dared to say she was not a joke. I hit send before I could overthink it. Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared on the screen from my brother's contact, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, he wrote that I was being dramatic, that Dad had always teased us, that I needed to stop acting like a victim. I stared at the word victim until the letters blurred. For a moment, the old pain flared up, the kind that comes from being misunderstood by the very people who share your blood. I let myself feel it. Then I set the phone down and walked into the kitchen. I poured a glass of water, took a slow sip, and listened to the quiet. I thought of my mom, of how she used to stand between Dad and me with a soft voice and tired eyes. I thought of what she would say if she could see that ballroom, hear those words. Watch me walk away, instead of sitting there and taking it. In my mind, I could almost hear her telling me that sometimes survival looks like leaving the table, even when everyone expects you to stay seated. When I returned to the living room, there were more messages waiting. One from a woman in human resources who had been kind to me when I was a teenager working a summer job in the mailroom. She said she was proud of me, that she had never liked the way Dad talked about his family, that she was glad someone finally stood up. Another from a mid-level manager who had always been neutral. He admitted that the chairman had looked furious when he realized how my dad had behaved. He said people were already whispering that the board might want to slow down the celebration of the new CEO, until they understood what had really happened. I sat down on the couch and pulled my knees up under me, wrapped one of my old throw blankets around my shoulders. The lights on the little tree blinked lazily in the corner. Outside, a plow rumbled down the street, scraping ice. In the distance, I could hear a dog barking. For the first time all night, the tears finally came. Not huge, gasping sobs, just a steady leak that ran down my cheeks while I stared at nothing in particular. I cried for the little girl on the church steps, the teenager on the ball field, the young woman at her mom's funeral, for every time I had swallowed my words to keep the peace, for every dinner where I let myself be the punchline so that the evening could end without a fight. I also cried, though I did not want to admit it, for my dad, for the man who had been given chance after chance to be better, to be kind, to be proud instead of cruel, and who had chosen, over and over, to take the cheap shot instead. When the tears finally slowed, a tired kind of resolve settled in their place. I wiped my face with the edge of the blanket and picked up my phone again. I scrolled through the messages until I reached one from a number I knew as the main line for Great Lakes Industries. The most recent text from that contact simply said that the chairman wanted to meet with my dad in person after the holiday to discuss what they termed concerns about his conduct. Concerns about his conduct, an entire childhood wrapped up in 4 plain words. I set the phone down and leaned my head back against the couch. I could feel something forming inside me, a line I was no longer willing to let anyone cross. Not my cousins, not my brother, not even the man who had given me my last name. Running away from this would be easy. I could ignore the calls, avoid family gatherings, and pretend not to hear the gossip. I had been doing versions of that my whole life, but for the first time, I understood that staying silent now would not just protect me, It would give my dad permission to rewrite what had happened, to turn Ethan's stand and mine into yet another story he told his way. I could not let that happen. I thought about the look on my dad's face when the wine hit his shirt, when he realized the chairman valued someone he had spent years tearing down. I thought about the way he had reached for the old excuses, the old jokes, and how thin they sounded. I thought about what might happen if I sat across from him without flinching and told him directly that I would not be his punchline anymore. The idea scared me, but it also made me feel strangely light. By the time the clock in the hallway chimed midnight, I had made up my mind. I would not wait for him to come stomping into my life with another half-baked apology tied to his own fear of consequences. I would go to him first, not as the child hoping for approval, but as the woman who had finally learned where her own worth came from. I turned off the tree lights, rinsed my glass in the sink, and went to bed knowing that the next conversation with my dad would not look like any we had had before. Next morning, I opened my front door before the knock finished landing. My dad stood on my porch, shoulders hunched, skin pale under the winter light. For a moment, he looked like an older version of the man from my childhood, the father who always appeared too big for small spaces, except this time, he looked shrunken, pressed in from all sides. He asked if he could come in. I stepped aside. He walked into the living room slowly, stopping when he reached the edge of the rug, like he did not know what to do. With himself. He told me the chairman had called him that afternoon. His voice shook as he said the board now wanted a written explanation about the Christmas party incident. They wanted details about what he had said to a VIP guest and why. They wanted to know if this was a pattern. I watched him run a hand over his face. He said the chairman had not decided anything yet, but my dad could feel the shift. He kept repeating that he had worked almost 30 years to reach that promotion, that everything could be taken away with one board meeting. Then he said he needed my help to fix it. I did not say anything. I waited. He took a breath, steadied himself, and told me he was sorry. Sorry for how he treated me that night. Sorry for how he embarrassed me. Sorry for letting his mouth get ahead of him. His eyes stayed on the floor as he spoke, as if the apology were something heavy he did not dare look directly at. But the tone was wrong. It was thin, rushed, soaked in fear. I felt the truth land in my stomach. He was not apologizing because he finally understood what he had done to me. He was apologizing because his job was in danger. I asked him when he had ever apologized like this before. He did not answer. I asked him if he would be here now if the chairman had never made that phone call. He turned away. He muttered that I was making this harder than it needed to be. He said that families should help each other, especially when the stakes were this high. He told me he had provided for me my whole life, and all he needed from me now was one simple favor. I told him the truth, that he was not asking for a favor. He was asking for cover. I said that the chairman was not confused about what happened. The only person still confused was him. He fired back that I was exaggerating, that it had only been a joke, that people laugh at toasts all the time. I asked him if he remembered the silence that fell after his words hit the table. I asked him if he remembered the faces turning, the way even his coworkers stepped back from him like an electrical wire had. Snapped. He waved his hand, irritated, and said that people were too sensitive these days, that everyone overreacted. Then he said the thing that made something cold and final form inside me. He told me that I was blowing this out of proportion, on purpose. He said I liked being the center of the story. I asked him if he had any idea how many years I had spent trying to stay out of his spotlight. How many times I had stayed quiet to keep the peace. How many times I had hidden my wins so he could keep calling me small. He said I was being dramatic. I said he had no idea what dramatic looked like, but he had been performing a version of it for decades, every time he needed the room to bend around him. We stood on opposite sides of the living room, my dad clutching the back of the couch like he needed something to hold him upright. I told him about the church steps when he joked about my weight in front of the pastor. I told him about the baseball fundraiser where he told strangers I ate too much. I told him about every moment from my childhood that I had tucked away because it hurt too much to keep in front. He did not deny those stories. He just said he had been trying to toughen me up, that I had always taken things too seriously, that I needed to understand the real world. I told him that the real world was what I walked into every day at the hospital. The real world was stitching a soldier back together while alarms blared and someone counted down blood loss. The real world was not his jokes. He said again that he needed me to tell the chairman that everything had been blown out of proportion, that I had not been offended, that it had been a misunderstanding. He told me I could save his promotion. I told him I was done being the thing he used to save himself. His shoulders dropped. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the right words. He finally managed something that sounded like an apology, but it came out wrong again. He said he loved me in his own way. He said he did not mean to hurt me. He said he did not know what else to say. For a moment, something inside me softened. Then he said the next line, the one that stripped away the softness. He said that if the board demoted him, everyone in the family would blame me. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow. I stepped closer. I told him I would meet with the chairman and I would tell the truth. I would not embellish, and I would not protect him from his own actions. I said I would not let him use me as a shield. He looked startled, almost offended. He asked if I understood what I was risking. I told him he was the one risking things, not me. The room felt small and cold. My dad rubbed his hands together like he could warm them. Then he asked if I would at least promise to speak favorably about him, to protect the title he had waited for his whole life. I said I would speak fairly, that was all. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Something in his face sagged. He nodded once, stiff and reluctant. He walked toward the door, stopped with his hand on the knob, and said he hoped I would not regret making things difficult. I told him the only thing I regretted was letting him make things easy for himself at my expense for so long. He left without saying goodbye. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting my breath return slowly. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. For the first time, I had not tried to protect him from the truth. For the first time, I had protected myself. Outside, the cold wind rattled the porch rail, and I felt something shift inside me. A boundary, drawn clean for the first time. I knew the next step would not be easy, but it would be mine. And when I finally walked into the chairman's office, I planned to do it standing tall. I arrived at the Great Lakes Industries building early that morning, earlier than I needed to be. The sky was still gray, the parking lot half empty, and the cold bit through my coat as I stepped out of my car. I could see my breath floating in the air like pale smoke. My hands tightened around the strap of my bag as I walked toward the glass doors. I had slept only a few hours, but I felt steady in a way I had not expected. Something inside me had clicked into place after my conversation with Dad. I kept thinking about all the years I had waited for him to be the one to stand up straight. Now I was finally doing it for myself. The security guard greeted me politely. I gave him my name, and within a minute the chairman's assistant appeared, a woman with soft brown hair and calm eyes. She asked if I wanted coffee or water. I said no. She led me down a quiet hallway, the carpet muffling our steps. When she opened the door to the conference room, I saw the chairman standing near the window. He turned at the sound of the door. His face softened when he saw me, not with pity, but with something warmer, something like respect. Then I noticed Ethan at the far end of the table. He stood when I walked in, hands behind his back in that instinctive military posture. He gave me a small smile, the kind that says, you do not have to do this alone, even if you walked in, thinking you would. We all took our seats. The chairman folded his hands on the table and thanked me for coming. He said he knew this had not been an easy week for anyone, and that he appreciated my willingness to talk openly. He asked me to tell him what I wanted him to know, in my own words. I sat back and let the room settle around me. I told him what happened that night, the way my dad's voice rose, the laughter around the table, the shock that froze the air when the truth slipped out through the chairman's phone call. I told him the part no one else had heard, the years of small cuts and public jabs and quiet humiliations. I kept my voice steady. I did not raise it. I did not soften it. I just spoke like I had in operating rooms when everything depended on clarity. When I finished, the chairman nodded slowly. He thanked me for telling the truth, not the softened version. Not the one that would have been easier for him to hear. He said he had spoken to every witness at the table that night, and most of the people who had sent messages afterward. He knew exactly what had happened. He said he wished my dad had been honest from the beginning, but fear had made him reach for excuses instead. He leaned forward, his expression serious. He said that leadership was measured by how a person treated the people they believed could not affect their future. He said my dad was good at his job, but the board needed to consider whether he could represent the company's values now, at the highest level. Then he looked at me and said he wanted to know how I wanted to proceed. For a moment, I could not speak. No one had ever asked me what I wanted where my dad was concerned. No one had ever waited to hear what would make things right for me. I took a breath and told him I did not want to see my dad torn down. He had worked too hard for too long. I also told him I did not want to protect him from consequences he had earned with his own choices. I said I wanted fairness. Nothing more, nothing less. The chairman nodded again. He said that was exactly what he had hoped I would say, because fairness was the standard he intended to use. Then he shifted slightly and looked toward Ethan. Ethan held my eye for a moment before he spoke. He said he wanted to thank me again, not just for saving his life, but for showing courage in a room where it was easier to shrink. He said he had been talking with his dad for months about creating a bridge between the medical and military worlds, a small advisory program built on experience instead of politics. He said that if I was willing, he wanted me to join that program, not as a symbolic gesture, but as someone whose judgment and training could change the way wounded soldiers were supported when they came home. He said it would be flexible, it would respect my hospital work, and it would give me a seat at a table where my voice was needed. The chairman added that they also wanted to nominate me for a regional medical award for emergency trauma work. He said they would like to make a donation in my name to a program that provided mental health support for veterans. I felt something shift in my chest, something warm and heavy at once. All the years of working behind curtains, all the nights spent alone after surgery while the hospital went quiet. All the moments when I wondered if what I did would ever matter beyond the people on the table in front of me. Suddenly, I was being offered a place where my work was not hidden. It was seen. I said yes. My voice did not shake. The chairman smiled. Ethan let out a breath I did not realize he had been holding. We talked for a little longer, going over detail, discussing what the next steps would look like. When the meeting ended, the chairman stood and asked if he could walk me out himself. As we walked through the hallway, he told me something that made my throat tighten. He said that his son had almost died, and when a father stares down the possibility of losing a child, he never forgets the hands that kept that child alive. He said he would be grateful to me for the rest of his life, no matter what his company did or did not do. Outside the conference room, my dad stood near the elevator. He must have been waiting for the meeting to end. His coat was draped over one arm. His eyes were tired. He looked at the chairman first, then at me. The chairman gave him a polite nod, then excused himself with the assistant. When the doors closed behind them, my dad stepped forward, clearing his throat. He said he had heard things went well. His voice was tentative, careful, like he was afraid to say anything too loud. He said he wanted to thank me for speaking fairly. He said he knew I did not have to. There were no jokes, no self-pity, just a man trying to say something that did not come naturally to him. I told him I accepted his thanks. Then I told him something else. I said that I forgave him, but forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant I was choosing to move forward without carrying the weight of the past. I said that from now on, I would not let anyone treat me the way he had, including him. He nodded once, a small, almost stiff movement, but it was real. For the first time, he looked at me like a person, not a mirror he wished he could fix. We walked outside together. Snow was falling again, light and soft. He opened his mouth once, maybe to say goodbye, maybe to say something else, but he closed it and gave me one more nod instead. I watched him walk to his car and drive off. The wind lifted the falling snow, spinning it around me. I stood in the parking lot for a long minute, letting the cold sink into my lungs and the warmth settle into my bones. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing fully in my own story, not hiding behind silence, not shrinking to make someone else feel tall. I felt seen. I felt steady. I felt like the road in front of me was mine to choose. And as I walked back to my car, I knew exactly what I wanted to say to anyone who had ever felt small in their own family. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.